Le président vénézuélien et le capitaine Traoré se sont entretenus. Vous pouvez le voir sur ces images. Les deux hommes ont évoqué les relations entre leurs deux pays. Nicolas Maduro a salué le combat mené par le peuple burkinabé pour sa liberté. On l'écoute.
Picture the Sahel at sunrise. Red dust swirling, the air thick with the promise of change, and the distant echo of drums being replaced by something new. Whispers turn into headlines, suggesting an unprecedented sight. Cuban and Venezuelan boots hitting Burkinabé soil for the first time. The narrative is potent, a cinematic vision of South-South solidarity in action. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso, appears to be flipping the grand chessboard of global influence, welcoming soldiers from Havana and Caracas. This isn't just a diplomatic handshake. It feels like a loud, unapologetic breakup text with the old colonial playbook. However, while the story of a pan-revolutionary military front captures the imagination, the reality on the ground is more complex and, in many ways, even more significant. The confirmed arrivals are not from the Caribbean, but from Russia, whose Africa Corps personnel began setting up in Ouagadougou in January 2024. Yet the spirit of the initial rumor holds a deeper truth. Burkina Faso is indeed forging a new coalition of the sanctioned, a network of nations long defiant of Western dominance. Signed agreements for broad cooperation with Venezuela and Cuba are very real. So what truly happens when a nation decides to end its inherited friendships and choose its own, bringing together the resilience of Moscow, the revolutionary history of Havana, and the oil-flavored rebellion of Caracas into a new, uncertain future? To understand this seismic shift, you have to understand the man at its epicenter. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a 30-something officer with a fatigue cap often tilted just right, stepped onto the world stage from a coup in September 2022. It was the country's second military takeover in just 8 months, a clear sign of deep national instability. Yet this felt less like a simple power grab and more like a national sigh of relief for many. Traoré didn't promise immediate miracles. He promised something more fundamental: dignity. For years, villagers in Burkina Faso's north watched French military convoys from Operation Barkhane roll past, yet jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL continued to overrun their fields and villages. The violence escalated dramatically, with thousands killed and millions displaced, creating one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises. The perception grew that the presence of the former colonial power, France, was not solving the problem. For some, it was part of it. Traoré tapped into this deep vein of frustration. He began preaching self-rule and spelling out the word sovereignty in every interview, arguing that Burkina Faso had to take control of its own destiny. The crowds in Ouagadougou roared their approval, but in Paris and other Western capitals, the reaction was icy. The man wasn't following the script. What followed was not just a change in tone, but a systematic dismantling of the old security architecture. In January 2023, Traoré's government did the unthinkable. It officially terminated the 2018 military accord that allowed some 400 French special forces to operate in the country, demanding their departure within a month. The French ambassador was also asked to leave. It was a public and definitive severing of ties. But this created a security vacuum. Who would replace the French? Traoré's answer came swiftly. He turned to new partners, most notably Russia. In late 2023 and early 2024, the first contingent of about 100 Russian military personnel, part of the newly branded Africa Corps, which absorbed the infamous Wagner Group, landed in the capital. Their stated mission was to provide security for Traoré himself and to train Burkinabé forces in counter-terrorism. Soon after, Russia's foreign minister pledged to supply more military equipment and increase the number of instructors to help defeat the remaining terrorist groups. This move was mirrored by Burkina Faso's neighbors. Together with the military-led governments of Mali and Niger, Traoré formed the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, in September 2023. This mutual defense pact explicitly states that an attack on one member is an attack on all, creating a new political and military bloc in the heart of the Sahel. Soon after, all three nations announced their withdrawal from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, a regional body they accused of being influenced by foreign powers. While Russian boots and guns addressed the immediate security question, Traoré's vision for a new network of allies was far broader. This is where the story of Cuba and Venezuela finds its factual footing. It's a story not of expeditionary forces, but of a different kind of alliance, a family reunion of the sanctioned. In February 2024, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Ivan Gil visited Ouagadougou, where he and his Burkinabé counterpart signed 20 cooperation agreements. These deals covered everything from energy and agriculture to education and aviation, with plans for Burkinabé experts to travel to Venezuela for training in its vital oil sector. Similarly, cooperation agreements were deepened with Cuba, a nation with a long history of providing medical and educational support to African liberation movements. These partnerships are built on a shared ideology of resisting Western hegemony and a desire for South-South cooperation, a framework where developing nations help each other without the conditions often attached to Western aid. This diplomatic offensive didn't stop there. Burkina Faso has also deepened economic ties with Turkey and signed a multi-billion-dollar gold mining deal with Oman, structuring the agreement as a joint venture to ensure that profits are shared, a stark departure from old models of resource extraction. Across diplomatic WhatsApp groups in Western Europe, ambassadors must have spat out their peppermint tea. The reaction was swift and predictable. Paris expressed its concerns. Washington dusted off the destabilizing label, and ECOWAS confirmed the suspension of the three AES nations. The United States, which had once seen Burkina Faso as a rising security partner, watched as years of policy unraveled. Yet here is the paradoxical twist. Every threat of sanctions and every expression of condemnation from the West only seems to have fueled Traoré's street credibility. His message that outside powers were trying to dictate Burkina Faso's future seemed to be proven right in real time. If you wanted to sell sovereignty-themed t-shirts in Ouagadougou, you were already too late. They were sold out. His neighbors in the AES, Mali and Niger, who had already danced this two-step by expelling French forces and welcoming Russian trainers, texted heart emojis in solidarity. However, this defiant path is littered with potential speed bumps. The first is money. Cuba can share invaluable expertise in medicine and education, but hard cash is tight when its own economy has been strangled by decades of sanctions. Venezuela can offer fuel and energy know-how, yet its own hyperinflation and crumbling infrastructure make large-scale foreign commitments difficult. Even the new primary security partner, Russia, is facing its own immense pressures. Unity inside Burkina Faso isn't guaranteed either. As the initial patriotic fervor fades, public patience, as fickle as the Sahelian weather, will demand tangible results. Taxi drivers might joke about having power cuts with salsa music, but the underlying sentiment is serious. If these new alliances don't lead to better security and a better economy, the cheers could quickly turn to shrugs or worse. The humanitarian crisis remains dire, and some data suggests that violence has continued to escalate even after the pivot away from the West. Ultimately, the power of this moment may lie as much in its symbolism as in its substance. An image of a Russian instructor teaching a Burkinabé soldier to operate a new anti-drone system under a baobab tree is cinematic gold for a new era. It whispers, your former colonizer isn't the only one with lesson plans. Every time a Venezuelan oil technician shares knowledge with a Burkinabé engineer or a new trade deal is signed with a non-Western power, a narrative rewrites itself. Africa can choose its friends, not just inherit them. This is more than just a military deal. It's three nations that have spent decades in the Western naughty corner now declaring, let's sit together at lunch. It's an attempt at group therapy for those addicted to foreign aid, a declaration that the continent is no longer a passive stage for geopolitical rivalries, but an active agent in its own right. So, is this the Sahel's Independence 2.0, or a risky remix of Cold War-era allegiances that swaps one dependency for another? The tickets for this new tour, featuring Russia's hard power, Cuba's resilience, and Venezuela's oil-flavored rebellion, are non-refundable. The audience is global, and the reviews are still being written in villages, embassies, and terrorist hideouts. Whether the encore brings stability or simply sparks a new scramble for Africa, one thing is clear. The old script no longer dictates the rhythm. The West may be concerned, but its concern is no longer the deciding factor. Keep your eyes on the Sahel. The next chapter won't be translated by the usual suspects.